In this video, I want to offer you my long overdue thoughts on the Fujifilm X-T5. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Now in today's video I want to offer my, as I said, long overdue thoughts on the Fujifilm X-T5. Now I picked up my two X-T5s on the day that they were released here in Korea, and I've been working with them ever since. So I know that I've promised to make this video a few times in other videos and also in the comments, but honestly, with the amount of shooting we've been doing this year, coupled with the fact that I really didn't feel like I had much to contribute to the existing conversation about this camera, meant that it sort of got pushed down the to-do list quite a few times. Now this review is going to be coming from the perspective of a working photographer who uses the cameras day in, day out. I don't need every little feature, I don't work in JPEG mode, and I don't shoot video using these cameras. Now I've even kept my X-T4 for certain jobs that don't really need the resolution of these cameras, and also for filming on this channel. Now, so far with the X-T5s, I've photographed 22 corporate events, 37 couples, 4 editorial assignments, and 33 families, and even a couple of commercial assignments in there as well. Now, looking at the X-T5 as sort of a dependable workhorse is how I'll be coming at this review. And because of the nature of how I work with the cameras, I've been struggling a little bit with my previous combination of the X-T3 and the X-T4. Now, the X-T4 was great in that it had IBIS, but I really could not get along with the articulating screen on that camera. Now, the X-T3 had the experience that I wanted, but once you've started working with IBIS and you've got a taste for how it can bring a little bit extra to your shoots, it becomes an indispensable part of your workflow. So for me, there was always a trade-off with one body or the other, and working with both on every single shoot was getting really, really tedious. The X-T5 did away with this issue, so I ordered 2 and got to work immediately as soon as they arrived. Now, this is why I bought them. Not because of the sensor and not because of any of the new features. I needed to have 2 identical bodies that worked for me on every single one of my bread and butter shoots. Now, for me, this wasn't really an exciting release, that would change the way that I did anything with my photography. It was Fujifilm getting all of the necessary pieces back into place for me. Now, with the X-T2, there was a huge boost in speed and autofocus. With the X-T3, the entire sensor got PDAF, and the processor was much, much faster. With the X-T4, we finally got IBIS. But with the X-T5, the point of this, at least from my perspective, seemed to be correcting the missteps of the X-T4 and just bringing everything back together into what the X-T series should be. Of course, there's the 50% jump in resolution as well, but I don't need that. So honestly, for me, if it wasn't bringing back the screen and getting IBIS into this camera, I would have just skipped the X-T5 altogether. Now, having said that, working with the X-T5 has, it's been a really, really good experience. It's a great camera. It feels like a Fujifilm camera. It produces the images that I know and love, and it does away with all the issues that I found with the X-T3 and the X-T4. But I still do have a few misgivings about this camera, and I feel like Fujifilm has made a couple of different missteps along the way, so we'll get into those throughout the course of this review. All in all, the body of the X-T5 is very similar to the X-T4. The layout is almost identical, and that's really great because basically what it means is that I could pick up the cameras and get to work. Now, the buttons and dials have all been updated physically a little bit though, and if I had to nitpick, I would actually say that the X-T3 had the best feeling buttons of any of the X-T cameras. The X-T5, they feel a little bit mushy and a little bit cheaper in comparison, but so far they have held up nicely. Now, Fujifilm mentioned in their launch that the camera was smaller and lighter than previous models, and they were not joking. Now, it's tiny in comparison, and it feels significantly lighter. Sometimes I wish it was just that little bit larger because I struggled to keep my hand on the grip comfortably. Now, the X-T3 again was much better in this regard for me, and also the decrease in size means that my tripod plates now block the battery door, so I have to remove those to change batteries, which wasn't an issue on the X-T3 or the X-T4. Now, still, the cameras take up less space and they're lighter to carry around, so that's definitely a positive. Now, There have been a couple of changes to the way that the body operates that are absolutely infuriating. And the first is resetting the focus point to the center of the frame. Now, with every single Fujifilm body that's had a focus joystick to date, double tapping that joystick has brought the focus point back to the center of the frame. Now, that's not so with the X-T5. You need to tap that once and then reach down to the back button and tap that. Double tapping the focus joystick does nothing now. Now I have to retrain my muscle memory specifically for the X-T5. My GFX 100S, X100V, X Pro 3, X-T4, all the other bodies work exactly as they always have, but now I have to remember that I'm using an X-T5 when it comes to a function that I use dozens of times a session. Why, Fujifilm? What was so difficult about double tapping that you couldn't just leave it there? Now the second is formatting memory cards. With every other Fujifilm body, a 3-second press of the delete button followed by a tap of the rear dial has brought up the format card menu. On the X-T5, for some reason, both of those now need to be held for 3 seconds. Why change it now? I truly struggle to understand who actually benefits from changing something on a single body in a series of bodies that work exactly the same. So, with these two, I would love to see a firmware update. Let's call it Kaizen, shall we? An update that allows us to select how we would like those buttons to operate, whether we would like them to operate the same way every other Fujifilm camera operates, or whether we would like them to operate in the way that the X-T5 operates. At least give us the option, Fujifilm. As I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't upgrade to the X-T5s for the sensor. Extra resolution for me is one of those sort of nice to have things, at the times when I might need a little extra cropping power, or maybe I want to get all nerdy and look at the details that my different lenses can produce. But aside from that, my day-to-day work doesn't even require the 26 megapixels of the old sensor. I simply don't print anything that big to really need it. Now, one thing that did surprise me though was how well Fujifilm stabilized the new sensor. Now, when I upgraded from my 12 megapixel Nikon D700 to the 36 megapixel D800, one of the major growing pains for me was trying to get sharp images from the new sensor. We had to be so much more careful when shooting handheld with that sensor. With the X-T5, I really haven't noticed that being an issue. The IBIS is absolutely great for photography in this camera. The downside of the extra resolution for me though is in the volume of shooting that I do. Now, I produce thousands of images in a given week, and the 50% increase in resolution basically translates to an equal increase in file size and processing time. So that means that in a given week, I'll use 50% more storage than I would have before, and I'll also spend 3 to 4 hours longer copying, importing, and exporting files than I did before. Now, that's a lot of extra hours in the work week for me, but if you're using this camera, for something a little bit more casual, like a little bit of landscape photography or a weekend out for street photography, you really won't notice this, this change in processing time. Like I said, that's to do with the volume that I shoot. Now, what I would love to see in the next firmware update is exactly what I asked for in my GFX 100S review, a small RAW option. Now, it really cannot be that hard to implement when almost every other camera manufacturer is doing it and allows us to shoot a smaller format. Now, with this 40 megapixel sensor, that could be a 16 or a 24 megapixel file. Even the now 15-year-old Canon 5D Mark II can do that. So options, Fujifilm. That's all I'm asking for. With the original release of this camera, I penned my thoughts on the autofocus, and I basically said that nothing had really changed in any appreciable way. It felt a touch faster, but there were no substantial upgrades to the way that it worked or how accurate it was. And my initial delivery for this section was, quite scathing. But now that we've had a little bit of firmware love for the X-T5, I would like to revise those thoughts slightly. The first big thing is to do with the face detect autofocus. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a Fujifilm camera. It will still find faces in a tree or a blank wall. But it does find faces that are much smaller in the frame now, and it also continues to track them very, very well when they turn away, or it switches to sort of a full body detection mode when the person gets too small in the frame. Now, this is a great improvement, but one of the features that I have requested over and over and over again was to have the face detection algorithm coupled with the current position of the autofocus point. Now, that way, if you had, say, a group of people, you could place your autofocus point over the face you wanted to focus on, and then the camera would look there before looking anywhere else and focus on that. Now, the X-T5 finally does that. Now, it's been such a big improvement for things like, a family session where I might have a child running in front of their family and I want it to track that child, not the mother in the background. I can actually make it do that and it won't just jump away and find mum every now and again. It's also been really great at corporate events where I've got multiple people in the frame and maybe I want to pick out a specific one to focus on in the crowd. I can now just move the focus point over that person and it will find them and focus on them very, very easily. So really, Fujifilm, well played. That is an excellent upgrade to the autofocus system to make it so much easier to use. Now, in terms of speed and accuracy, I've noticed some small improvements. Now, especially working with the new linear motor primes, the camera is blazing fast in AFS and AFC. It zips into focus quickly as I could ever want it to, but it still does tend to randomly miss focus in both modes from time to time. Now, if you'll excuse the pun, what I would really like to see from Fujifilm in the next firmware upgrade is a focus on autofocus accuracy. It doesn't matter how quickly those lens elements can move into place, how smoothly, if it's not in focus when they get there. The final addition to the camera was the AI subject detection, which, might be a cool demonstration of technology, but it isn't really where Fujifilm needs to center their attention, I don't think. I would argue that far more photographers would benefit from a major improvement in autofocus accuracy than from the ability to automatically find a train in the image. Photography first is how Fujifilm marketed this camera in the beginning. Now, as far as I can see, that means that Fujifilm thinks all photographers really want is high resolution and a tilting screen. There are a few decisions they made during the development of this camera that really don't align with that marketing tagline. So let me explain a little bit. Now, firstly, there is the video implementation of this camera. Now, with the X-T4, moving the video still switch to one place or the other opened up a whole new menu system with the required settings for the mode you are currently in. Now, the X-T5 still has that switch and it still saves a few of your settings, but for some reason, the video settings are in the photography menu now, and you have to skip over them every time to get to still settings. Also, your current video capacity of your memory card is displayed while you're in photography mode. Now, I've never been shooting stills and suddenly wondered, I wonder how much 4K 24 I have left on the current memory card. Now, you can turn this off in the menus, of course, but then it turns it off in video mode as well. So, Fujifilm, you had it right in the X-T4. Why the change? It just makes photography and video more cumbersome, not one or the other more focused. This is actually one of the reasons I still own my X-T4. It's so much easier to flick between video mode and have everything ready to go when filming for this channel, and then switch back to stills mode and have everything ready to go for stills. It just keeps the two separate and much easier to use. So, to Fujifilm again, please separate the video and stills just like you did with the X-T4. It worked so well. The X-T5 has great video features, but they just get in the way of your photography first tagline rather than actually improving the way that either stills or video are captured. I don't really see how that change benefits any of your potential users. Now, to me, photography first means keeping video settings out of the way, offering a deeper buffer for those who like to work with sports and things like that, and also offering a vertical grip for those who prefer the ergonomics in photography. Okay, it's rant time. The Q menu, or the quick menu, has been crippled in the X-T5 just like it was in the GFX 100S. The top left tile of the Q menu is now locked into Fujifilm's custom settings function and can't be switched out for anything else. Now, this is fine if you work with JPEGs and want to make your own custom presets for those, but for everyone else, it's a wasted tile that shows what shooting mode the camera is currently in. Thanks, Fujifilm. I always wanted to bring up the so-called quick menu to check if I'm in manual mode or not. This needs to be fixed. The quick menu is a way for us to quickly access functions we use a lot that can't be fit on one of the buttons on the body. That top left tile is the first one that shows up. It's the one that's selected and it can't be assigned. Now, that's just plain annoying. Okay, rant over, but Fujifilm, really, it's Kaizen time. The things that I'll mention here are things that I have talked about before. Now, the first is that we have to record a JPEG just to change the preview ratio in the camera. If I need to shoot a square or a 16:9 for a particular application, I shouldn't need to record JPEG files in addition to RAW files. These JPEGs just take up space and processing time in the camera, and I'm only going to throw them away, so why do I need to record them? The solution here would just be to set a flag in the RAW file that tells the camera, and of course post-production software afterwards, what ratio I was using in the camera and sets it accordingly. Now, while we're on the topic of aspect ratios, I would love to see the gorgeous 65:24 aspect ratio from the GFX cameras making its way over to the X series. Now, the issue that Fujifilm sees with implementing this can't be about resolution. The X-T5 and the X-H2 have almost as much resolution as the low resolution GFX bodies. Now, I can't imagine it's about processing power. The X series has a more powerful processor than the GFX now. You're not going to convince anyone to buy a GFX body for a JPEG ratio, so that certainly can't be it. The only thing that I can see is that Fujifilm doesn't see X users actually wanting it. So I, for one, would love to see it implemented. Raise your hands in the comments if you would also like to see 65:24 previews in the camera. Now back to the quick menu, and I promise this one won't be so emotional as the previous one. Now, image stabilization settings can be accessed by digging through the menu. They can be accessed by wasting a custom function button on them. Why can't they be accessed through the quick menu? To have the ability to change OIS or IBIS modes from the quick menu shouldn't be that difficult. Again, this should just be a simple firmware update that would really improve the experience of using the camera. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I have nitpicked a little bit throughout this review, and that's because this is really a great camera. Now, Fujifilm has got a lot of things right, but they've made a few missteps, which they really shouldn't be doing in the 5th iteration of a flagship camera. Now, this camera should be the point where they are refining all the great things about the previous cameras and the way that they worked, not flip-flopping between feature sets or, changing meaningless button shortcuts to make them unfamiliar to people who have used the other cameras. So overall, I love that this still feels like an XT camera. It still has the same body design with the dials on top, the D-pad, the focus joystick. The performance has been slightly improved, which makes for the overall experience feeling a little bit more seamless. The lighter weight is excellent. The battery life is amazing. I get through a full day of corporate shooting or a full family session without even having to worry about the battery at all. In terms of things that I'd like to see changed, I'd love to see a fix to the quick menu and a revert to the original button shortcuts from the other Fujifilm cameras. Now, the complete separation of video and stills features again would be great, as would a steady improvement in autofocus accuracy rather than speed. Now, I'd also like to see a small RAW function implemented so that we can save storage space and processing time when the full resolution of the sensor isn't necessary. Now, we can change the video resolution. Why not the stills resolution on a photography first camera? Now, with all that being said, I've put nearly 50,000 images through each of these cameras at this stage, and aside from the few issues that I've mentioned here, they have performed really, really well. And I've enjoyed both working with them and working with the images that they deliver as well. Now, since I've had quite a bit of time with them now, I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you might have about the X-T5 or how it compares to other XT cameras. So please do get involved in the comments below. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you enjoy the slideshow at the end. So please do like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next video.